you're telling me to slow down. You're telling me it's going to take longer. I don't have enough cash already. And so you're making it a lot more expensive and unfun. You fun suckers. Why are you telling me this?
The fun piece for some entrepreneurs, the fun turns out to be getting something into the market, right? But for some entrepreneurs who are, and this gets into the shiny object syndrome piece, it's all about being famous and all of this. And yes, then we're getting in the way.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fearless Founders again. We're excited to have Keith Deutsch here, a new friend of mine. We ran into each other networking on LinkedIn, and I was blown away by what he has experienced and what he's done. Perfect, as I was explaining to Ike, for you, our audience, who are first-time technology founders. Keith has had insight and experience in helping build over 30 companies from a technical perspective. And today our entire discussion is all around building the right products, the right strategy to get it out to market, and particularly one thing that I keep seeing over and over again in my clients as well as in my network: how do you go from version 1 that succeeds and gets funding and gets the ball rolling, but how do you make successive version 2, or from 1 to 2 as the lingo will be, 1 to 2 to succeed, or 2 to 3, because invariably the first time the founder's involved, but the second time and onwards, it's not so much involvement, and that causes some issues. And with that, we're excited to have you, Keith. Welcome to the show. We appreciate you.
Thank you. So,
tell us about your background. It's beautiful.
I have been involved in early stage companies almost exclusively, not entirely, for a very long time. I joined my first startup as the third employee, ultimately the VP of engineering there, and the only manager, and that was in 1985. And this was to build an advanced graphics workstation back when that was a thing. And it's one of the interesting things over the years is to see what has been a thing over time, because the center point of the computer industry and the digital world keeps shifting.
Yeah.
So I did that, and then a couple of years later, when that first one died, because one of the things you learn in this world is that the vast majority of these things don't succeed, and there's good reasons for it. But and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it, because it's again, it's the nature of these things that they're going to fail, and then you go and do it again and again and again until you succeed. But I co-founded my first company after the death of that first startup that I joined in the late 1980s. We built a product that kind of shifted an industry, and that was an interesting experience around that. This is the digital prepress industry back again when that was a thing. And, I found myself in the middle of a war between Microsoft, Adobe, and Apple. People forgot about that, but there's some interesting stories I could tell you about, because the product we built was bought by a company called Aldus, who were part of the initial desktop publishing revolution that made the Mac happen.
Yeah.
And then Aldus got merged into Adobe.
Yeah.
And so I'll tell you a quick story about that just because it's fun. So we built the product I built, which solved this impossible problem in this world. And all this internally, they called it Holy Grail. That was their name for it.
Mm-hmm.
But it used a PostScript interpreter that Microsoft had created in order to kill Adobe. So we licensed that from Microsoft. And that was an interesting experience in and of itself. Built it into the product. Aldus licensed it. Now, that war ended very quickly because Adobe turned around, opened up their type fonts, and became an entirely different company. And all of a sudden, everybody was friends again. Meanwhile, we were the only licensee that I'm ever aware of that built a commercial offering built around this Microsoft PostScript interpreter, which got acquired by Adobe. And Adobe, therefore, became the only company in the world selling a product based on Microsoft's, PostScript interpreter. And so I was standing in a room with John Warnock, contemplating whether or not to explain that to him, and I didn't, because I like John Warnock, and I didn't want to puncture, any balloons. But that was my first real experience as a product manager, as a technology leader in an early stage company that I co-founded, and it had an interesting outcome.
Wow. So your second got ultimately sold to Adobe.
Well, we sold the product. We sold the
Yeah.
product, not the company, which was unfortunate. We should have sold the company, because then I would be having a different conversation with you right now.
Yeah, exactly.
But we sold the product, and the product got rolled into Adobe, and they rolled it into their core product line, the underlying technology, and it was there for a dozen years or more as a key differentiator for their products.
So can you tell us? So you are not just a coder that started off. You have now had enough experience in all of these companies to figure out the strategy as well as how the engineers can help create the product.
Right.
And because small businesses, you have to wear multiple hats. You had to sell, you had to do all of this stuff. But fundamentally, you're the glue that allows a technology to be created in the right space, in the right strategy, and hopefully then launched. And you've done this 30 plus times.
That's exactly right. And this key thing is getting it launched, because as I think I mentioned to you offline, if you have a new product that's a disruptive product that the market doesn't really understand, introducing that into the market is very different from a stable, understood product. And quite frankly, and I apologize to all the product managers who may be listening to this, but the fact is, product managers by and large are not trained to understand how to introduce a disruptive product into the market, because the problem is it disrupts. And you don't know quite, and you have to understand what you're disrupting, because you may have the best thing in the world, the best mousetrap. I'll tell you a story more recently. That this is one of my favorite stories of a discovery about where the obstacles were in introducing a new product. So I spent some time at the Palo Alto Research Center doing research commercialization. And one of the first projects I got involved in involved a technology for changing the way in which bridges could be maintained. Bridges, large, the things that are always falling down in the news, and they make a lot of noise when they fall down. And I meant that figuratively, but they do literally too. And anyway, so this was a radical new technology based on fiber optics that allowed you to instrument a bridge and monitor it through its life cycle in a way that hasn't been done before. Great. Now, there were a bunch of problems with it the technology not being as ready as people thought it was. But the real thing was, so they had this notion that they're just going to roll this out, get it in front of people who maintain bridges, and they were just going to love it. So I started talking to some of these subject matter experts as a starting point, just talking to them, saying, how do you do things today? Because I didn't know anything about this world, and I started exploring, and I very quickly made a very interesting discovery about how they do things today, and why that might be a problem for a product coming in, offering the possibility of completely altering that. So the way bridges are maintained today is every year or so, they send out a team of contractors to go inspect it. And they write a report and they file it. And it doesn't work very well, right? But it has this interesting characteristic, because I asked, well, so what happens when a bridge falls down? Who pays for it? Whose problem is it? And it turns out it's the contractor's problem. They hold the insurance. So what emerges from this as a feature of this current system, not a bug from the standpoint of the people who are responsible for these bridges, is a distribution of liability that keeps it off the liability off of them. So we're going to come in and say, don't do that anymore. Here's this better way. Are they going to trust us to displace this wonderful distribution of liability and take it on themselves just because we say so? Maybe in 5 years, but not right away.
Yeah.
So the challenge there was, well, how do you get this radical new product into the market so that you add value, but don't disturb that which is currently working for the, whether it's working for the world at large, it's working for the people who have to use the product, who would be using the product. And so I said about looking for other things we could do that were not addressed, but that would add value and maybe not nearly enough value to fully pay for the development and where we want it to go, but enough to get us into the market. And I came up with a few different things around, cars hitting bridges, combining monitoring with monitoring the traffic, things of that nature. Lower value overall, but without any resistance. There would be no resistance to that
Yeah.
product.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not supposed to do that, but I did it. Anyway, so that's an example of the kind of needle threading that you have to do with a radical new product. It was a
It's
somewhat long story, but the bottom line is you'd be amazed at what you'll discover. Now, in that first product that I introduced, way back that I was describing originally, I effectively did that. I didn't fully understand what I had done because before I came up with the product idea, I had spent a year or more just stirring the pot with all of these people in the digital prepress world, learning how they did things, learning how that world worked. And so when the moment came, and it was a pivot for this company, I have to say, our original goal was not to solve this particular problem. It was to solve a problem in image compression, which turned out to have issues. So I went looking for what else we could do, and I realized there was this impossible problem that we could solve. But I also realized almost instantly that there was a particular place we could be in the chain of value that wouldn't attach us to one side or the other of this distribution of value, and wouldn't limit what we could work with and wouldn't threaten anybody else, but it was sort of in the middle. I realized there was a place in the middle between the desktop tools and the rendering tools where we could sit and solve this particular problem.
Keith, I have to interrupt you because you talking of so many pertinent topics, Ike,
Yeah.
that I can see. And number one, I've got to stop you because you are too experienced right now. Hold a sec.
Okay.
Oh my word! I already learned a couple of things, and I've experienced this. Number one, many people create products, think it's going to be whiz bang, ultimately to find out that they don't truly know the real opposition, the real threat to their
In the
success,
market.
to the success in the market. Everything is all technology whiz bang. Oh, if you build it, they'll come. Excitement about it, only to find later on, oh crap, I hadn't anticipated this. I didn't know
Right.
that the obstacle to selling would be so severe. We've got to change. And yet we've spent all this time. And here's the important topic that you brought up. Not enough of that preparatory work is done by most of our founders because they're excited and they've gone to actually prove their case, looked for examples in the marketplace to substantiate why they should do this
Exactly.
versus being really objective. Can you not agree with
Yeah,
this?
this is amazing. And it, so my understanding, Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you when you're going from 0 to 1, instead of trying to build something that will replace an existing solution, which will create resistance by not only market, by your customers that you're trying to sell, find an area, even though it's lowered value, find an area, the gap, fill that you can replicate. That's 0 to 1, right? Like not we're not talking
Yes.
about 1 to 5 now, just
We're
0
talking
to
about 0 to 1. And someplace between 0 and 1, you might be able to pivot, but you got to get that. You got to be on your way to 1, well
1.
on your way to 1. And one of the things you learn is that people create features out of bugs.
Yeah.
So the things that don't work in the existing world, people engineer their lives around it, and it becomes a feature, not a bug. And that is what you have to be aware of. And so, yes, it's exactly that derailing of the product because you run into something that doesn't work, but it works in some way for the user.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Also, but if you go to a customer, say, look, I have a young product, but I'm gonna replace your entire workflow. I have not built a feature, not a product. I built a platform, and then you get into like you're missing 99% of what the incumbent has. That's not gonna work, right? So you have to.
Well, so that's the other thing is fitting into a world that exists, is tricky.
Yeah.
And again, not necessarily what you set out to do or what you thought you were going to do. And you need to figure that out before you start building, or you'll build the wrong MVP.
Almost all the time. Exactly correct. And we have so many stories. I'll give you a fast one, and then I want to explore even more. Keith, there was one business that I had in which I thought I had scoured everything, every need, every issue, talked to lots of people. In the end, I found out that the very suppliers of some of my IP were actually going to be competitors. Too late. It
Yeah.
was too late. After $1 million of investment and after moving forward with it, I realized, oh crap, I'm now boxed in by the very people that,
And you didn't leave yourself an out.
yeah, there was no
At
out for
some
me.
point, that might be inevitable. At some point, you can't avoid that, right? There's going to be, friendly competition or unfriendly competition or whatever. But you need to leave yourself an out, because you're vulnerable. You
Yeah.
don't get to make many mistakes when you first enter into market. Now, if you're a giant company, you can make those mistakes and just pour
Yeah.
money into it and
Yeah.
make your way through it.
So how do we minimize? What advice would you give to our listeners and viewers? How do we minimize this so consistent error that everyone makes? How do we avoid this or minimize?
You don't get to go into a market unless you really understand the life cycle of the people in that market. And that's just a piece of exercise you've got to do. Back when I was in the publishing world, there was a phrase, if you had experience, you had ink under your fingernails. And you had to get to the point where you had enough ink under your fingernails that you were credible, so people would talk to you. And then you need to listen to how they're actually doing things, and what workarounds, not just the problems, but what are the things they did that makes it somebody else's problem?
Yeah.
Because those are the things that'll get you.
I don't know what you guys think about this. Like Keith, I've solved that problem in a different way, and I'd love to get your feedback if this is something that our audience could also use. I'm a techie. I'm the AI guy and all that. I know technology, but in my startup that we started recently, I picked my co-founder as the subject matter expert. He knows the entire life cycle of the customer. He was the customer. He
That's
lived
an
in this
advantage.
world, right? So like the technical founders, I think, if they don't have somebody like that, like they like you said, they need to learn and all the customer journey.
Either you have it at the outset, or you have to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And I've been in both scenarios. And by the way, the interesting thing about the subject matter experts is they don't necessarily know what they're telling you when they're telling you this, because they're embedded in it, right? So they're not looking at it. They're not going to sit there and say, we do this way, and we're not going to change that for you. So, don't come in here, come in. They're not going to, because they don't know that. I mean, if they would tell you, they might tell you if they could, but what you got to do is listen to them and figure out what they're not seeing, that they're going to realize is built into their life, way they do work later on.
Yeah, like I have two examples for that. I was in a investor conference, I think Norwest Ventures in Silicon Valley. They've invited one of their portfolio companies. I think it was OneSend. It's just like just one API to send millions of emails.
Mm-hmm.
The founder said, we invited all these industry experts. They said, we cannot launch this product unless you have these 15 requirements, because like without those requirements, nothing is going to happen. But they stuck to their guns and they just had one feature, one big API that does all of it, and so simplistic, the company took off.
Mhm.
And the second one is, you probably heard, Henry Ford asked the customer, "What do you want?" Like, faster horse. So
Mhm.
sometimes customer don't know what, like, cannot
Well, that's
explain what
exactly
they want, right? But you have to come to a conclusion.
because they are mired in their present,
Yeah.
and that's their job. It's not a criticism, you know. If this is what I do for a living, I'm going to be very expert on how I do it today. Um, I'm not necessarily going to understand what might be possible with a different technology. That's my job as an entrepreneur. But
Yeah.
I got to get past that. So, Henry Ford could have come out with another horse, or he could have come out with something that was so different from a horse that maybe infinitely better, but nobody could use it.
Yeah.
He managed to come out with something that was sufficiently like it. He came out with the horseless carriage, right?
Yeah.
Not the automobile, the horseless carriage. So it was modeled after a carriage because people understood carriages. They knew how they worked, right?
That, it's a valid point, you guys. You're coming up with a thing, but I'm going to tell you from a founder stage. You're talking about boring stuff. You're stopping me from doing what I want to do. You're stopping me from achieving my dreams and what I'm hoping for. And you're telling me to slow down. You're telling me it's going to take longer. I don't have enough cash already. And so you're making it a lot more expensive and unfun. You fun suckers. Why are you
So
telling me this?
the fun piece for some entrepreneurs, the fun turns out to be getting something into the market, right? But for some entrepreneurs who are, and this gets into the shiny object syndrome piece,
Yeah.
it's all about being famous and all of this. And yes, then we're getting in the way. But from the standpoint of taking longer, well, if you do it right, it doesn't take longer because you're probably trimming out lots of extra things you need to build in that first version of the product.
Yes.
Now, you're right. You do have to be very cognizant of what it's going to take to get this into the market, and it's not just opposition in the market; it's also resources.
Yes.
And
You said it correctly. I've learned as I got progressively more experienced, the more you understand, the more focused your deployment of resources is, including what the product looks like. And just like that 1 cent example that I talked about, you really have a much better product. It is absolutely worth delaying and understanding and spending the time. As much as my facetious comment was made just a moment ago, I'm 150% behind. Slow down just to understand what it is that you're creating and why you're creating and how it works in the competition and how the users will be able to absorb it with minimal resistance. That's
I
it.
think I
That's the
like to
tall
think of
book.
it not so much as slow down, but take a breath and figure out what you have to do before you do it.
Mm.
And then move really, really fast.
How did you advise maybe a founder where you weren't the founder, but you became the CTO or the technical guru? How did you help them from the shiny object of, but I want this, I want that, and they're always saying, "Hey, we're going to do this," and then you're pulling your hair out. And I've talked to enough CTOs, VPs of engineering saying, "Stop it! We're never going to be able to finish this product because you're always coming forward with another topic."
So, so I will be very direct about this and say I have seen very high percentage of companies fail because in the end the founder couldn't get past that kind of obsession.
Yeah.
Now, that's unfortunate. It's one of those sad reasons why a lot of early stage companies fail. That is avoidable. But if the if the founder really is about trying, I mean, particularly if they've done this once or twice before, right? I mean, the real problem is the first time founder who thinks they're going to be a billionaire and it's just a done deal. But if you've got a founder who has maybe failed once, and failure is a good teacher,
Mhm.
and they might be a little bit more amenable to hearing what you have to say about that. They may already know enough that they can be the subject matter expert, and I can just talk to them, and it may turn out that they've thought about it some, and I can just help them solidify that.
But
I would much rather work with a founder than against a founder.
sure,
right?
Sure. How have you helped make the first-time founders' lens more accurate in seeing what you've already seen? How have you helped them sort of tap back into alignment?
Well, one thing is, when I have these conversations with the subject matter experts with the market, I kind of take the founder along with me, so they hear it too. And then we talk about what we just heard, so they understand, because they won't necessarily, if they don't, a lot of founders are very good at opening doors, but not necessarily as good at finding out what the content is behind the door. So you start to show them that. So let them open the doors, because they're probably better than me. It's one of the things that a lot of founders are very good at. It's one of the reasons they're founders. They're good at opening doors. They're good at seeing the shiny objects to go after, and they're good at getting folks to help them. That's great. If they'll let me, I will start showing them what's behind the door. And when they see that, hopefully they'll latch onto it and, move forward with it. You don't want to take away the entire big picture, right? You don't want to spoil the big picture, because that's important. It's important that the world understand what the big picture is, where you want to be in 5 years, and it's not just this first thing you're doing, right? But if they'll let me, and they'll work with me, and not all founders will, but many have, we can figure out what's behind that door and try to make something that will go through the door. And I'm stretching the metaphor a little bit here.
So, Keith, what is this secret ingredient pixie dust that you have that we need to understand? Why is it that you can do this and others have not?
And maybe give some stories. It's okay, like
tell us what it is that.
So I can't really tell you for sure why. I mean, when I started out in my career, I was just a completely deep nerd. I was a VP of engineering before I had any idea what a market was. In my very first startup company, and quite frankly, that's I got shoved into this world in that very first startup, because the company had completely ignored the market and was going to build the world's greatest workstation and then figure out what it was good for. The board got a little tired of that, and they pushed me into trying to find how to move this forward. And so I got shoved into this universe, and I had to learn how to do it. And it was a shock to the system. I had some good mentors, and I learned how to listen. And one of the things I've always been good at is listening. So a lot of engineers are not good at this because they're not verbal people. So you need to find somebody who is got some verbal capability. I'll give you a little bit of a secret of mine. I'm terrible at math. It's one of the things I didn't know in high school, but when I got to MIT, I learned I was terrible at math. I've always done better on, in the SATs and things like that. I've always scored way higher on the verbal than on the math. And I never understood that until I got to MIT.
Shocker.
And that's when I decided I wasn't going to be a physicist, by the way. When I saw what physicists actually did, I realized, okay, that's not me. So you need to find, somebody who is a technologist, but who's also verbal. I mean, I don't know how you set out to do that. You just have to find that person. And a lot of engineers will never be able to do that because it's just not how they're wired.
Yes.
So some of this is just plain wiring. I discovered when I was forced to, and believe me, I was forced to, that I could do this. And with some mentoring, I learned that I could do this reasonably well.
Could you give an example of the kind of questions that you would ask? You could even go to one of the many companies you've helped where you're on site or you're talking to this prospect to understand their life cycle. what kind of questions do you ask? Because I want the readers to be able to get some,
Well, yeah, going back to this bridge example, I was talking, I mean, so bridges are generally managed by these quasi-government organizations
okay.
that own responsibility for the bridge, but as I said, they contract out all the work, right?
Mm.
So I just started talking. So how do you do? What happens with a bridge? You know, how do you know if a bridge is healthy or not?
Yeah.
Well, we take this measurement and that measurement. Well, how do you get those measurements? There's nothing. The bridges are there's no instrumentation on the bridges today. I learned that. So how do you do that? Well, we send out teams. Well, whose team? I mean, you just get their story. And as you're listening to it, you're thinking, okay, so they send out this team. They're reliant on this team. So who is? Are they your people? No, they're contractors. And, again, it's a sequence of questions like that that lays out, well, how do you do it? And sometimes it's easy. And in this conversation, they laid it out straightforwardly. Sometimes it's a lot more intricate because there's a lot more buzzwords involved, and you have to, again, with the ink under your fingernails thing, a lot of the world of graphic arts and publishing was, what are they talking about? When they start talking about I mean, the problem we solved was this very obscure problem called trapping that I'd never even heard of, and that nobody today would have any idea what I was talking about, but had to do with how printing presses work, and you had to get deep into the guts of the printing press to understand the problem and why it was an impossible problem to solve, right? In the case of the bridge scenario, I just sat down with a few of these people, and then I asked some leading questions on subsequent conversations with others to confirm it, but it wasn't that hard to find out, oh, this is the way it's done. Is this typical? Yeah, I mean, I worked at this company. I was in this organization here, but I this was all done in Australia. So I was Victoria, but I was previously in some other in Queensland, and they did the same thing there. You know, so you look for confirmation that you're not getting just one isolated story. You want some confirmation that this is global. One of the things that I've often done in the past, and this is harder to do now because they don't do trade shows anymore, where you can just go and talk to a whole bunch of people. It's unfortunate. It's one of the things we've lost in the modern world. But I used to do a lot of this by going to a trade show and listening in a conversation and just inserting myself, helping people find answers to the questions they were asking of the vendors. Right? So that was one of the techniques I would use to get myself in there and, without posing any threat, start posing questions that got inside of how things were done.
Because you are going to absolutely enthrall us on topic one, and you have so many other topics. If I may, I want to kind of steer the conversation towards, for me, a big issue. So you get your MVP. In fact, it gets along. You have enough customers now. You feel really excited, and you may even get money coming in. You got your version 1. Great. 0 to 1 is there. But then comes the huge task when now you've got other people in the team. The money allows you to get the experience. And then to a point, you feel like you have to empower the new leader of the engineers, and they thud. They do not bring out version 2 that has the same or proportionate increase in value, and you just spend money after money after money and friction, and you start feeling like you're held hostage by the VP because they've got everything now and you cannot control what you used to control. Is that a good way to say it?
Yeah, I'm dying to get Keith's input on this.
So the scenario you sketch is a little different from what I was thinking when you started asking the question, but it is true that you will expand the organization. There's a couple of things you got to realize. Remember what we said in the first version. You necessarily made enormous compromises in what you were delivering, both in order to get it done, but also because you needed to get past the barriers to entry. Now you're in the market. You're starting to be positioned to contemplate how to sort of go back into the tougher area, sort of start moving your product back into the higher value but tougher area. but you've got several problems. One is your product is in use, which means you're being flooded with input, about.
That's an understatement.
Right. I mean, the good news is they're using it. The bad news, well, I guess it's also good news, but it sort of occupies your attention, is you're getting constant. Well, this is great, but I need it to look 3 inches to the left, and this over here. This would be great if only it also did this slightly other, and you get into this whole incremental sequence and you need to be moving quickly because you don't want to lose the attention of your customers. So the good news is you got a product in the market. And the better news is it's going through that rapid growth iteration of maturing. The problem is it's not the product you really wanted to get into the market.
Mm-hmm.
It's the product you could get into the market. So how do I veer it over? In the meantime, your engineers and your new engineering team are probably, and your product managers are soaking up all this input, completely focused on that. And, as you said, you have an organization now between you and what's happening.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
believe that most of the time they're being derailed by the maintenance and incremental improvement versus the
Well, that's exactly what I
revolutionary.
just said.
Yeah.
Right. Because guess what? You got your product into the market probably 6 months before it was really mature enough to actually be in use, because that's what you do. So that means you've got an enormous pain right there that you knew you were going to have.
Yeah, without that, how am I supposed to get the
but now
feedback?
you got it. What's that?
Without that, how am I supposed to get the feedback so that I can course correct?
Well, now it's in the market, so you're getting the feedback. Great. And now you're fixing all of that massive technical debt that you sort of put aside, because you couldn't afford to think about it. Now it's there. You hired some people who are good at this, but you got to get that. But if you stay in this place in the market will move around you.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't just stay there. It's not a bad place to be because you're making money. Your customers are loving you for what you're doing. You're learning, you're improving the product, but you can't stay there because, again, the market will continue moving and your opportunity window will close. You're a player now, so it's not like the window is going to close quite as quickly as it might otherwise, but you got to move. How do you do it?
Yeah.
And that is every bit as tough as the first one. Some of it is just because you've got your product in the market doesn't mean you can stop hiring early stage people, right? You can't just say, okay, it's in there. I need some normal steady state product managers and steady state engineering managers to do this, because that's what they'll do. You'll be in steady state and you'll be in steady state forever. And you can't afford to be in steady state because that wasn't the end game.
Yeah, another one is like, oh, I should get somebody who has seen the scale. So I should get from a large company because
You're not ready to scale yet.
right? But yeah, that's the wrong decision.
It is. But everyone does that. Everyone does that.
Because and by the way, investors are a big problem in this because they put enormous pressure on you to do that. To get the big name CTO.
Yeah.
Right? Well, the big name CTO is not, and may once upon a time have been the scrappy startup CTO, but they're not anymore. And so they're thinking big things. And you have this problem needing to move the next step. And so you need to resist that pressure. And a lot of it is building the team that will do it, because if you build the wrong team, you'll have exactly the problem you just described.
Yeah.
And then it becomes almost impossible to derail that. You almost have to go and start a second company.
Yeah, like this is so good. Like what I see is like, Keith, when you say resist that pressure, it is so hard to resist that pressure for a first-time founder, where for the first time you just got VC gave you $10-15 million, you're hiring, you're up in the mountain, but that's the reason sometimes the second-time founders, third-time founders are more successful because they can resist, because they've burned so heavily.
And they may not raise that $15 million A round at that point. They may go out and either fund it some other way to customers, or they may find some more money from some angels who are more susceptible, who are more amenable. Because the reality is, when you go for an A round, I have to apologize to all the venture capitalists who might be listening to this. Venture capitalists are risk averse.
Mhm.
They are not high risk people. The notion that your tier one venture capitalists are the high risk people, no, they're not. They're investing in a scaling round.
Yeah.
They're not investing in the creation round.
Yeah.
And so you're not ready for the scaling round because you're not done creating. So you really want to, if you can, resist that A round. And if you need more, I mean, the best case, you're managing to do this on revenues.
Yeah.
And if you have a good anchor customer, they may even invest, on their own to get you where you need to go. It's the value of having a first class anchor customer.
So are you telling us that even after you've got version 1 and you've got more people allocated, customers, and taking care of bugs and taking care of incremental features, you need to create another small team that has the scrappy dynamics and experience to almost create a new business unit within that company?
Well, that's one way of doing it, if you can. It may be that you calve off some people and devote some people to just maintaining and doing maintenance. Now, what tends to happen is that the exciting stuff is the new stuff, and so all those people who are doing maintenance are going to probably very quickly get pulled into and want to get pulled into the new thing, which has its own risks, of course, because you do have to maintain the thing you've got out there. You know, if you've hired right, you don't need to have that hard separation. You don't have to play that game. You can, if you hire the right people, they'll understand we have to do two things now. We have to do just enough maintenance to keep this product alive while also moving really fast to get version 2 out.
So is there an allocation that says a quarter of the resources should go into version 2 or a half or what?
I hate it when people ask, give me a number. It kind of depends on just how much of a mess that first version was. I mean, let's face it, sometimes you go to the market with something that is just barely operational. It may not have even been your intent. You might have built a prototype thinking you're going to get that into a friendly customer and let them play with it. And lo and behold, they said, we don't want to play with it, we want to use it.
Yeah, and I'm going to do a slight detour, Ike. I'd like your advice on this. I'm seeing with AI and the innovation and the constant change that it's going through, this is even more difficult because you could argue that AI's evolvement is so high that you never get to finish version 1, and that version 1 is not in steps to version 2. It's on a straight line. It just keeps evolving as if you're doing updates to it from Tesla's center to the cars. It's just a continuous feed.
So if I may, first, your comment, Benoy, about do you separate 20%, 25% of the employees there? No, in my opinion, in a startup, you really have to have superstar engineering team that are going a lot faster than usual engineers.
Yeah,
and also you cannot afford to break your people to maintain something old that you developed 6 months ago, because the knowledge they have from those mistakes and customer interactions and what customer is asking is actually crucial to what your version 2 is about. So you have to have those people involved. You cannot create two separate teams, at least in the early stage. That's my point of view. With AI, you're right. It's it's unlike anything, the speed of change. Like right now, everybody is talking about either agents or this method of connecting the AI agents together. That was not, like, Anthropic came up with it 3 months ago. That nobody knew about it. It didn't exist. Now everybody's talking about that's how they're connecting. So but that's why you have those extraordinary teams that can live on the edge, but also can understand the input from this customer is so crucial to keep that customer. So when you build the version 2, they're going to use it. It's inseparable.
Yeah.
And what I said about the team, I can't over agree with that. It's impossible to over agree with that. I've seen a lot of founders who have this notion that they're going to outsource engineering. They're not going to spend a lot on engineers, especially with this illusion that AI now makes it easier, supposedly because of vibe coding and such. That's a mistake. You have to really invest in those first few engineers. They need to be self-propelled rock stars that don't need enormous amounts of process and management. They just do it.
Okay, I believe both of you. I'll be the non-techie here, and Ike, thank you for the explanation on the AI side. But back to that whole talking about calving a portion, and yet Ike says you cannot separate these guys. So how do you make version 2 successfully reproducible when we're given all the factors you've talked about, from risk-averse investors who are saying, what are you doing with the money at the board? They're going to get a lot of pressure, to engineers.
That last one is in some sense above my pay grade. That is the founder's problem. They have to manage that. Yeah. They have to put a boundary between what's going on internally and those investors. If they've had the flexibility to find good early investors, there'll be some understanding there. If they've gone the more traditional route, then there won't be.
Yeah.
But you can't break the engineering team up. What you can do is separate their time. So you have to think in terms of time segmentation, not people. And again, if you're one of the things I've seen that I think is counterproductive is an obsessive need to define process at this stage. And process is really hard to define at this stage because people are, by definition, you're asking people to be schizophrenic. You're asking them to have their split their brains up and be over here and over here at the same time. You need people who are mature enough to do that. And you can outsource some small. There's a certain level of bug that is, lower level kinds of things, and you might be able to get some junior engineers. That's a judgment call. But the core of your team can't be split. You can't say you're going to work on the new stuff, you're going to work on the old stuff.
Yeah. So how do you create new stuff that is revolutionary, not evolutionary? Now you got the talent. You told me you get super high grade A stars players who can be schizo. How do you still?
Well, remember, you picked your initial market entry, hopefully very cleverly, so that it embodied the core of what you're trying to do, but the actual value delivery was narrow.
Yeah, compromised, as you said.
But that's the value delivery. That's sort of the outer shell of it. Yeah. The inner part of it, hopefully you have built not something toy, but the real thing in terms of the innards, the core of what you're building, which makes it a little easier to start adding something very different on top of it. And again, if you've thought this through all along, then you're planning. It's not a surprise. It's not like, okay, I got this out in the market. What do I do next? You better already know what you're going to do next. You better already have a pretty good hint as to, okay, if I get this out into the market and it does this much, and I get people using it, where can I go next? You need that. in your mind, you need that, and you need to be preparing for it. And if you do that well, the pivot is not as traumatic.
Yeah, to me, as a technical founder person, I'm bringing to the table here. Like the next thing that I need to do, the one after that, the one after that is already here because I started the journey with my North Star.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So for founders, I think that's not the problem, but implementing that with the engineering, with the customers, and with board or investors breathing on your neck, that is the challenge. And every 6 months, every 1 year, like the time frames are changing now. What you've developed now as the state of the art architecture will be technical debt in 6 months because you have to move in small chunks.
Mm-hmm.
So to me it's gonna be like this. You're gonna have a new version, and then the new version will be missing some features, so it's gonna go like this. Saying you're gonna catch up, so that you have to be like in steps. You have to get the new architecture out, even if it's missing some of the features that you developed 6 months ago, and then you'll catch up, and then you'll develop more. Do you know what I mean? That's how I'm doing it. But
Absolutely.
not knowing what's next is not even in the picture to me. It's that's already there.
It's got to be there from at the beginning. And so one of the things, let me back up and talk about another favorite thing that I like to poke holes in. Difference between large A agile and small A agile. You definitely need to be extremely small A agile, but a lot of the large A agile stuff has this notion of you build a slice. Just build a slice, of what you're going to do and get it out there. That doesn't work because it leaves you in this problem of, okay, now I got it out there and I have nothing. In fact, the next thing I may build may be completely break the first thing I built because I didn't. So you have to build things you have to start from a view of, I have this technology vision. I need a theory of operation for the entire technology vision. I need that as a whole at the outset. And I need to have that completely embedded in my soul. This is the machine that I'm going to build, the whole thing. And you think of it in layers. And you start building it in layers, and you can't build it in vertical slices. You have to build it somewhat, but you have to be careful as you're doing that, because you don't want to spend too much time in any one layer. Yeah. Otherwise, you'll be there till next year, But you need to be very cognizant of where you're going at every step and build this thing up. So you're building more than you need right now. You're building the contracts, the abstractions, the contracts that you rely on later on.
Yeah. If
you do that right, then you can come back in and fill in the gaps lower down in the platform as you need to without breaking everything. And flexibly move forward. It's a big ask.
My previous team in the previous company would hate when I say this, like layered cakes. I'm glad you said it, not me. They hated it. But maybe I'll use a Benoy pyramid example. The ultimate goal is to build a Giza, right? But you can't, like Keith said, you can't just build a column for it, right? So you build a mini pyramid, and you build a bigger one, and then bigger one, and then eventually gets back. But you always have to, when you build the baseline, if it's the first layer, your next thing has to be able to put on top of it as a new feature. Once you're full, that the base can support it, you build a new base, and then everything else becomes again. So base more pyramid, I think. Mm-hmm. And the base is architecture.
I like this. I get it. And I'm going to ask this. We've run out of time, but this topic is so useful. So are you telling me, both of you, that because of the vision you've had for the entire platform play, as you incrementally add to get to version 2, that you don't have to go back to do subject matter expert life cycle understanding of the client because you've done it before?
You're doing it all along. You're doing it all along. Because, by the way, one of the things you got to measure, because remember I said there'll be resistance when you first go out there to something. You don't know what, but you got to find out where that resistance. But that shifts. In fact, you're trying to shift it. That's kind of the exercise here. You're trying to shift it, so you'd better be continually sampling the environment, so to speak, to find out whether it's shifting the way you wanted it to.
Got it.
Yeah, and Bino, just so we're on the I'm accurate. This pyramid doesn't have to be a platform. This pyramid you're building might be one vertical solution about one thing, but still you need to build it like a pyramid. And as you're building, like he said, like get the input from the customers and then disrupt more of the players as the pyramid gets, and then disrupt more of the incumbents more and more and more. But it doesn't have to be platform. It could be just one single vertical application, right, Keith? Am I right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, you're typically going to go after one application, initially you kind of have to because you need that focus. But when I build these things, I typically start from a data model. And that data model is built around business objects. So I embody what I understand about the market in the data model. And that gives me a language and a flexibility for everything that follows. Right? And if you don't do that, if you don't spend the time up front to kind of do that, first of all, you get confused as to what you're building, and things don't cohere later on. But if you start at the very bottom and say, what are all my business objects? What are the operating parts? How do they relate to each other? In the case of that bridge example, one of the things I started with is, what's a bridge? I mean, I intuitively know what's a bridge, but I didn't know what a bridge was from the standpoint of a data model for us. So I went out and talked to them. One of the things I was doing with subject matter experts saying, what's a bridge? What are its parts? How does it come together? When we instrument it, how do we think about it? And you build that into the data model, and then that's a robust data model that will support everything you do.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah, that's a great advice, because in the AI world now we're in, we are being trained, hey, just dump your data to AI and then it's going to make sense of it. We'll give it to you. But without the data model of your customer's journey, the front end UI doesn't know what to ask, what to display.
Doesn't know what language to speak. It doesn't know what to ask for.
Yeah, exactly. So let's not caught up in the AI hype because it can understand unstructured data, but to build a product properly and go to market properly, you have to understand the data structure that you're building a pyramid on top.
Because everything builds on that. Again, it starts from the bottom.
Keith, if you were to summarize, what would you say to our listeners, viewers, on this topic of how to get from 0 to 1 and 1 to 2? This is the last bit.
Take a breath, figure out what your customers really do, and how to fit your technology into that world and change it from the inside. And that's true in number one. And then number two is all about making sure you did enough thinking up front that it is possible for you to not get locked in to supporting this one thing that isn't the second thing. Right? So whatever you build that first time has got to make it easier to move. So make sure you keep your body in motion, right? They say as you age, moving is important. Make sure you have the mobility to move based on what you've already built.
Fantastic. Ike,
Keith, it was awesome to have you.
Yeah.
I think
this is fun.
We will love it. I think you should come back again and we, double click on some of those areas even more, because there's so much more.
Sure.
As you know, like how to be the product strategist, designer, and then how to be the head of engineering.
Oh yeah.
I think those we have to explore those more, so that our founders can actually do, because founders are going to be those people, those personas. They cannot hire a people
And
right on set, right? They have to be. So we have to, I think, teach them how to be the product strategist, how to be the area of engineer. And unfortunately, they're going to have to learn how to deal with their board members from VCs on their own.
Yeah, and that's another topic you and I can have about how to manage the board on the very topics that Keith has brought up. There is so much, Keith. We loved having you. We will, if you're open, reschedule you again.
Well, this was enough fun that I would definitely do it again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You are sincerely needed, and your expertise. And don't be surprised. There may be some people reaching out to you and say, "Who's that guy again? How do I get a hold of him?" So
I'm very reachable.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope everyone enjoyed this, because we certainly did. We got all animated and time flew by. And until next time again, another round of Fearless Founders. And we were so happy to have Keith Deutsch with us today. Thanks all. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.
It was a pleasure.